here. Okay, cool. Well, we're here with Katherine Quevedo, who wrote a story that was pretty interesting called The Sphinx's Blind Date. It was a short story that sort of is about two creatures or, beings that are mixed with human and another animal, I guess. I wanted to ask what was sort of the inspiration behind that short story.
Sure. Yeah, it was kind of several ideas coming together at once for me. And it came to me very quickly. Usually I take a really long time to write my fiction, but this one came pretty fast. So I've always been fascinated by sphinxes in particular and Greek mythological monsters and creatures, especially just when I was in middle school, we had this capstone project where we could pick any topic to research and do a presentation about. And so I picked Greek mythological monsters and creatures. So I took that fascination with sphinxes and minotaurs and mazes and labyrinths and everything and started thinking about piecing them together somehow. And then I layered onto that this inspiring setting for me, which had existed in real life. There used to be this place in my hometown called Minstruck Chocolate Cafe. And I used to go there and meet with a friend of mine to exchange story critiques. And so it was this really inspiring, magical place for me. And they got rid of it. And I was really just wanting to commemorate that space. So even though there's not actually a lot of detail about the setting in the story, it was very much up in here and just wanting to have a place where someone is sitting and in that kind of environment. And then the other thought was that went into this was this idea of hybrid creatures and what they can represent to us and the type of connection that we can read into them. So, for example, a sphinx being having certain human characteristics and then certain animal characteristics tells us a little bit about what it means to be human or not to be human. And then having someone who's kind of her opposite was really interesting to me and to see what kinds of dynamics I could play with between those characters. And what was funny was when I sat down to write it, I honestly thought it was going to be a poem for some reason. It just, I had this idea, oh, a sphinx on a blind date with a minotaur. It's going to be this little poem. And it just came out as a story. This character started talking and had all these opinions and this kind of sassy voice that I wanted to see where that went. But I actually wrote it or in the same month as I had the opposite thing happen. I completely had sphinxes on the brain. And I sat down to write that same month what I thought was going to be a story about a South American sphinx, kind of an homage to my dad's side of my roots. And it started taking form as a sonnet. So that became a poem called Sonnet of the South American Sphinx. So these two pieces were different, surprising experiences for me to write, but I very much had them on the brain. They turned out so differently from each other. But it was this combination of a fascination with these types of creatures and what they can represent, and then wanting to explore a character dynamic between them in this kind of setting that I wanted to celebrate in my fiction. And it just took shape very quickly for me, which I just didn't expect.
Okay, yeah, that's very cool. So I'm wondering what was it, I guess, that made you want to do that combination of hybrid characters, the Sphinx and the Minotaur, instead of maybe a centaur or a mermaid or whatever else, that would be hybrid characters.
Well, that's a great question because I love those kinds of creatures as well. I think it was uh, thinking of the idea that the Sphinx was so opinionated and that I could have this character sitting down across from her have certain features that she would start off by nitpicking. And so the idea with the Minotaur being, this bullheaded, again, that sort of opposite of her, where she kind of is noticing his hands a lot because she has these paws and she's noticing, hey, he has opposable thumbs. And the idea of introducing the character and situating the reader into that situation right off the bat by having her not just come out and say, I'm a sphinx, here are my paws, that kind of thing. We get it from the title, but having her describe what she notices about him. Why is he wearing a leather jacket? He's a bull. And then having her think, well, I wouldn't be caught dead in fur or feathers. So those little clues to let us know who exactly she is and how she sees things without being completely overt about it. So I think it was that they could play off each other really nicely. And I I think for me, a lot of it was the tie between riddles and sphinxes, especially Greek ones, being so associated with riddles, and the Minotaur being so associated with mazes and labyrinths. Again, longtime fascination with mazes and labyrinths. So I really wanted to bring those two together to have a chance to both find those contrasts and then see if I could flip those into forms of connection between them. Because that's something I absolutely adore when characters from different backgrounds or cultures or different perspectives are forced together in some way. And then we can start to see where they either form new connections or there can be, whether it's forming an alliance or if there's romance or if it falls apart. But that idea of bringing those disparate backgrounds together and seeing what happens is something that has always from an early age really captivated me and something feel like I keep coming back to in my fiction.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, Cody, what was I think you had a comment or a question that you were going to ask?
I just noticed one of they're both there on a date. Like they're both there for looking for connection, but a little bit like pretty willing to just belt out or be putting up walls, and like she was getting standoffish, and maybe the Minotaur could sense that, and little clues like you said about not being too overt with it, like the ears flicking nervously like a cow's would. um I liked that, but also just the both members of the date were willing, like, because he was, sensing some standoffishness or whatever. It says, oh, what, I'm too bullheaded. Like, there was an element of they're willing to, cut their losses and go, but then suddenly she blurts out that she likes his hands. Like, I really liked that. I really liked the notion of suddenly the connection was formed.
Thank you. When I was trying to get to know his character, because she was talking to me, she had that voice already, but I needed to know where the story was going to go. And I knew that that would be through him. I went ahead and thought, okay, well, I'm also a poet. I'm a fan of wordplay and puns. So I thought, well, what kinds of sayings are there about bulls? Like, what could I bring in as banter or flirting or insults? Just what was there to play with? And so I looked up a list of phrases, idioms, sayings about bulls. And as I was reading through it, it just dawned on me they were all so negative. It was all, a bull in a china shop or BS or bullheaded. And I thought, this poor guy, like if that's what society is saying about you, and that's kind of the script that you're hearing all the time, like that's going to be a blow to his ego. And so I thought, again, it plays into the whole idea of building up those walls, and that sets a character up for this moment of vulnerability and intimacy. And so that was the moment for me where the characters started to take a whole arc where I could see where I wanted the story to go. And it did feel a bit sudden as I wrote it. And I feel like that harkens back to those roots of me sitting down thinking it would be a poem. Specifically, the fact that I also wrote a Sphynx sonnet at the time, because in sonnets, there's this term called the volta, and that's the turn or this change that happens right toward the end of the poem. And I like to think that as a little Easter egg in this flash story, that there's this little volta that happens. And so I think it took me by surprise as much as the characters. But I went with it because it just felt like that would be so satisfying. And it felt like everything was setting up for that to be a payoff moment. So I'm glad to hear that that resonated. But definitely it came from that research where at the time I just wanted to see where those two characters would go with their conversation and their banter. And it just became a moment of me feeling so bad for him and just thinking, if we just look past those initial assumptions, those first impressions, and really allow room for that connection, it felt like that was a story I want the world to have out in it. And it just, these characters felt like they could both grow almost in opposite ways. But again, him kind of letting the walls down and her look not being quite so aggressive and wanting to be the strangler all the time, and just acknowledging that maybe it is the finding of the opposite and the blending that really becomes that deeper connection and that moment for comfort, growth, and progress.
Okay, thanks. Well, I guess just the last question that comes to my mind is, do you think that you'll write anything like it in the future of a romance or a budding romance between two very different mythological or fantasy or sci-fi creatures?
Oh, I'm delighted you asked that. I actually have a novella, my first fantasy novella coming out later this month. It's called Thrice Petrified, and it's taking that kind of theme. It's all about fairies. So again, there are no human characters in that one either, but it's all fairies. And it's about my main character is from the forest. So she's very much this kind of soft, kind of naive forest fairy who, through a series of kind of misfortune and curses, ends up having to team up with this warrior hunter fairy from the high desert. And so it's very much playing into that type of, again, what do the first impressions mean? How do you get past that kind of thing? And when I, again, with that friend who I used to meet with at the chocolate cafe, this really amazing writer, Maggie Slater, she and I had been exchanging critiques at this cafe. And so one of the stories that I had sent her after the cafe had closed, sadly, was similar to this one. But she actually, when she read The Sphinx's Blind Date, she noticed, she said right away, it's a monster meet cute. And I thought it completely is. And I do have another story that I now realize is also a monster meet cute. I haven't found a home for it yet, but I'll let you know if I ever do. But again, yeah, it just feels like a kind of dynamic between characters that you can look at from a variety of ways. So it's something I'm sure I'll be revisiting.
Okay, well, thanks so much for doing this short interview. We usually just keep it, 10 to 15 minutes, and I was really happy to be able to read the story and be able to talk to you about it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate that you're elevating short fiction, especially of the speculative genres. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
I really liked it. The snarky voice of the Sphinx was quite endearing.
Okay, well, thanks so much.